ACI was built on four main principles. First, that any architecture that we put in place should be able to accommodate both physical and virtual devices. And those virtual devices could be Microsoft devices, they could be VMware devices, they could be OpenStack devices, who knows, they could be containers. The second principle that ACI was built on is that it needed to be open and secure. I would say that this is literally the most open platform that Cisco has ever developed. And it's definitely built with security from the ground up. As a matter of fact, with ACI, it's what we call a whitelist fabric or a zero trust model, where nothing's allowed to talk on the fabric unless we allow it via a policy. And when I say open, I mean that it's open both northbound and southbound, that we can integrate with orchestration and automation tools such as UCS Director or Clicker or vRealize or whichever other tool that you choose, or Ansible or Puppet or Chef. On top of that, the whole system is built on an open programmable interface or an API, so you can interact with it any way that you want to. You can interact with it through the GUI, you can interact with it through the command line, you can interact with it through Python scripts if you choose and call directly into the object model. For years we've been building these networks where we kind of build this big network that can do anything. And really what we want is we want a network that specifically caters to our application. And with ACI, we have that capability. With ACI, we're creating a completely stateless network so that we define a profile for how an application should act on the network, almost like an SLA. We say what type of security policy should be applied to that application. We say what quality of service should that application get, what layer 4 through 7 services should be in that application, whether that application is virtual or physical or both. And once we design a policy around that application, we actually start tracking the health of that application. And we can see into individual applications so that you know if Exchange is performing better than SharePoint, so that you know if your production network is running the way it should, or if your DMZ is experiencing an issue. And what this does is it creates operational simplicity in our environment, because now we're managing our environment with a policy or a known good configuration instead of managing individual switches in our data center. And all of this leads us to more of a private cloud or more of a cloud operational model, and that's really what ACI is built on. Now, ACI is built on actually a combination of both hardware and software, and the hardware portion of ACI is running on our next generation Nexus 9000 series switches. Our Nexus 9000 series switches can either be run in NXOS mode or they can be run in what we call ACI mode. Now, if you run them in NXOS mode, it's going to be similar to our Nexus 7000 and 5000, 6000 series switches that you've seen before. You're going to have similar commands. It's going to be very open still. That you're going to be able to use Python to configure it. You can get to the bash shell. You can do more stuff with the Nexus 9000 programmability-wise in NXOS mode than we've been able to do with any other switch. That being said, where I think the Nexus 9000 really shines is when you take a look at what ACI can do for your environment. But if you're not ready to go ACI day one, you can install your Nexus 9000 in NXOS mode, and when you're ready, you can go ahead and use it for ACI. That gives you investment protection built into the platform. The same can be said if you go ACI, you don't like it, you want to go back to NXOS, you can do that. Now, it's not a non-disruptive task to do either one of those. And you have to have the right licenses. You have to have the right license for NXOS and you have to have the right license for ACI. But you have that investment protection built in depending upon how you want to use that architecture. Most of my customers are buying a Nexus 9000 instead of buying a Nexus 5000 going forward, so they have that investment protection built in. Now, the ACI solution is made up of three different parts. First, we've got our Nexus 9000 series hardware. Second, we use a controller to manage the fabric. So we get away from managing individual devices. Now, you buy these controllers in odd numbers. They basically come with the system when we spec it out, and you start with 3 and kind of grow from there if you need to. but they're very highly redundant. They're kind of like a little Hadoop cluster. They replicate the information between them, and they're a little bit different than some of the other controllers out on the market. They basically just push policy to the fabric, and then they pull health information from the fabric. So the controllers actually don't sit in the data plane or the control plane. They actually just push policy, and then once the policy's pushed to the fabric has everything it needs to do to make control plane and data plane decisions on your traffic coming in and out of the network. So you could actually lose a controller and your network would still stay up and operate. But you most likely won't lose contact with your controllers because they're in a highly available arrangement. Now we manage everything through the controllers with our policy model so that we can configure a policy once and then push it to the fabric. And then when we plug in a workload to the fabric, it automatically senses that workload and applies the policy to the port. So we get away from managing individual ports and we start to manage the fabric. The other thing to keep in mind is that ACI is actually licensed by the number of leafs that you have in your environment. You pay for the controllers and you pay for the software that goes on the controllers, but you only license the leafs with the ACI software. There's also another component to ACI called AVS, and AVS is basically like the Nexus 1000V for ACI. The difference is that with the Nexus 1000V, we have virtual supervisor modules, and with ACI, the controllers actually become your virtual supervisor modules, and they actually control AVS or the Nexus 1000V just like they were another leaf on the fabric. The licensing for AVS is actually included in the purchase price of your ACI environment, as well as the support, so there's no additional cost for that. Please join me for the next lesson, 8.2, Examining Spine Leaf Architecture.